Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 3rd of April 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio is Nick Green, behind the technical desk, in fact. And from north of the border, we have David Scott. Now, I was speaking to David a few minutes before we went live, and he was briefing me on the weather in Scotland, so I'm going to pass straight across to David. Tell us what it's like north of the border.
Well, we're getting towards dreich here in Perth. Dreich being a fine Scottish word that kind of combines wet and cold and grey and unpleasant.
Okay, I understand that much as the Eskimos have got a selection of words for different types of snow, that this is the case in Scotland, presumably for snow as well as mist and rain.
Well, yes, in Scotland we have lots of words for untrustworthy politicians as well, again for the same reason.
Excellent. Yeah. We'll discuss those later on. It's brought a smile to my face at the mention of corrupt, fraudulent politicians. So let's remind ourselves that the elections have started, or have they? Because, of course, we're simply being told that what is going to happen in May is we are going to have a coalition. The UK column says this will be a big coalition of the mainstream parties. It will include UKIP. It will include SNP, of course, the Greens, and then maybe the odd token independent. But the agenda is create a one-party state. And, of course, this will be a very, very dangerous situation. South of the border, north of the border, we already can see a dictatorship installing itself, particularly with one police force for the whole of Scotland. So what sort of thing are we given by the parties for politics? So I had to think about that because I'm smiling. I know what's coming up. Let's have a look at what the Labour Party thinks we should be concerning ourselves with. And this was on their website a little while ago, that if you donated to them, you could actually have a designer Grayson Perry bag. So never mind about the fact we can't defend the nation, never mind about the fact that people can't feed themselves, never mind about the collapsing economy. Don't worry about that. Just send your money off to the Labour Party and they will send you a designer bag with a sort of genetically modified pig on it. Well, what are people telling us? They're telling us that they're watching the BBC, and the BBC is busy nudging people to get that very verdict for the election, i.e. a coalition. I'm sorry about the small print in this. We'll put it on screen and I'll read through. But it was a very good email sent in. Let's hear what the gentleman had to say. Just watched an item on BBC Breakfast at 8:45 showing three young people watching the 7 leaders debate from the night before. After the debate, these young people were then asked if their minds were now made up as to who they might vote for, having already stated that they were very undecided. It looked like clever editing by the BBC as it flipped from one to the other, giving little snippets of what looked like still undecided options. However, it focused very heavily on comments by 2 of these young people who said that it's probably best for the country if there was one big coalition anyway. You can just hear many young, uninformed, impressionable first-time voters saying, that's a good idea. Blatant attempt at nudging our younger generation towards the ultimate goal of a single-party government. I will be complaining to the, inverted commas, impartial BBC at this obscene attempt to direct how people should be voting. Well, we're going to say, well done, John, for spotting that one. And we'd be very grateful if you would let us know how you get on with the BBC. Well, of course, one thing the BBC does not want to report about is child abuse. And we thought with Easter, the Easter weekend coming up, where people are going to be, a lot of people will be back with families. They will be enjoying that family time, family life. We thought this was an appropriate time to remember abuse victim Melanie Shaw, who of course is sat in a cell in profit-making Sodexo prison, Peterborough. And let's have a look at this extraordinary letter that she sent out which highlights the complete lack of action by her local MP, Chris Leslie. Well, here we are. So just to remind ourselves, top left, we've got the happy, smiling face of Melanie Shaw, as she should be, and indeed was. We then have the haggard look of her after she had been abused and denied basic rights and medication in the government's profit-making Sodexo prison. Now, on the right is a letter which we received, torn up. And why was that the case? Well, let's see if we can bring that text in a bit. Hopefully you will be able to read this, but I'll take you through it. It's from Chris Leslie MP, Member of Parliament for Nottingham East, and it was sent to Melanie in prison. Dear Melanie, thank you for writing to me. It was very thoughtful. Please let me know if you're okay and being treated well and getting any medical attention you need. If you need my help with anything, it might be as well for you to let your solicitors know so that they can also contact me direct if necessary. Now, this is very interesting that he points Melanie at the solicitors, because these are the solicitors, VHS Fletchers, and Melanie sacked these solicitors as she had no confidence in them, and she was also deeply upset that people from this firm she had been led to believe were solicitors were nothing of the sort. And having sacked them in the recent court case she attended, the judge then tried to literally bully Melanie into re-accepting their services, which she clearly did not want to do. So the lady who has consistently represented Melanie as a lay legal advisor has been denied access to the courts and, of course, denied access to visit Melanie in prison. So what did Melanie have to say? Well, she used a swear word, which I'm not going to repeat, but I think you might be able to read it on screen. And she said, I ripped it up because I was fuming. And you can sense the frustration in this letter that an MP, a Labour MP, of course, who promised to help Melanie, has done nothing of the sort. He sat in the background, essentially waiting for the floor to blow over. Well, what is he good at? Well, he's very big at standing up on the Labour Party conference stage, boasting about what Labour is going to do for the country. Here we are, the plan for Britain's future. But he's not so good at standing up for child abuse victims and whistleblowers. Sad, but to be expected from the pitiful state of Britain's politicians. And David, I'll hand over to you. Any comments on that letter?
Well, you can certainly see the frustration and fully understand the frustration, because if you're prevented from having proper, fair, impartial legal advice, and as so often happens, find yourself in a position where the legal team, your legal team, is actually working against your best interest. And this is a theme that comes up very frequently, both sides of the border, when you're dealing with these cases with child sexual abuse. There's so much vested interest in favour of covering things up. The legal team is often essentially part of the cover-up. It took a while for Robert north of Scotland, north of the border in Scotland, to identify and develop a relationship with a very good legal team, and they were absolutely first class on his behalf, and were, I believe, completely incorruptible. They're very, very reliable human beings, but those are quite rare finds, and if you don't have the chance to get someone like that in your corner, you're then left in a position where you're constantly being undercut in any sort of defence that you muster. So I can fully understand the frustration.
Well, we are going to say that the country's on a knife edge, because quite clearly proper justice has gone, and what they're pushing on to follow is the destruction of law and order. But we have child abuse victims now trying to speak out. That's what the government says they want. What's happening when they speak out? Well, literally, they're being fitted up and put into prison. And of course, the legal profession are absolutely helping this. Well, we thought we'd bring on this article from the Mail, which is very informative. It's a mother who was wrongly arrested amid claims of neglecting her Down syndrome daughter. And she's just won a court battle against a police officer who simply lied. So here's the mother, Valerie Cadman Khan, and she's with her daughter Amy. And the story is very simple, that policeman makes an accusation that she'd left her daughter out in the cold in the garden. Mother is arrested, dragged off with her daughter screaming well, it must have been blind panic as she saw her mother being taken away. And the mother's had to fight it through the courts. The police have, of course, admitted that the officer lied. Here he is, Detective Sergeant Colin Haler. But his lies, of course, were then supported by social services. So I've got another side to this, of course, but we'll just pass it over to you at the moment, David, because I think you'd seen this article in the paper.
Yes, it's very striking, and obviously with the Holly Gregg case foremost in our minds up in Scotland, it reminded us so much of what had happened to Anne, where she was arrested and taken away to a psychiatric hospital in order to, we believe, intimidate and silence her. What we're seeing here is lies and collusion, and also a failure of common human decency, because you're seeing people being dragged off, leaving screaming children behind, and a level of manifest injustice that you don't need legal training to identify. You don't need anything other than normal human empathy to see that is wrong. And yet, through all this professional training, we have police officers and social workers who are willing to carry out these acts.
Yes, well, let's bring Anne and Holly on screen. Our comment on this was, of course, that while the Daily Mail bothered to report the other case, there's been no mainstream press or media reports on the Holly Gregg abuse case. And of course, the BBC was mysteriously pulled off when they did show an interest in investigating. But what's the background to the Holly Gregg case? Well, Holly says she was abused by a gang of people. That those words were supported by the authorities, who said she was a credible and truthful witness. In fact, she was paid criminal injuries as a result of what she'd suffer. But the police and social services and the government north of the border have clearly lied. They said there was an investigation when there's been no investigation, and this has been supported through the courts. So these particularly vulnerable children, of course, are being made a mockery of, and their parents, in order to further the aims of the police and the state.
Yes, the lies here are coming from several sources. The big lie, and like all big lies, it gets constantly repeated, and it's trotted out by the great and the good in Scotland. It's trotted out by the Lord Advocate, by the Crown Office, by you name it. You can get this story from any branch of the Scottish Government. Any MP will repeat this. There has been a full and thorough investigation into these matters, and there is insufficient, credible, reliable evidence to take the matter forward. That's the line. Now, the lie here comes from the full investigation. They didn't investigate fully because they didn't actually seize any computers. They didn't essentially interview any of the accused. They didn't interview any of the people who were alleged to have also been victims. What investigation was made, I don't know. It obviously started off differently, because the police officers who were involved in this originally were very supportive. One of the police officers wrote to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. He said that Holly is a truthful witness to the best of her ability and an entirely innocent victim. The Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority found in her favour, and she was paid £13,500. Now that's a civil payment, so the standard of proof is lower. The standard of proof is the balance of probability, not beyond reasonable doubt. So simply because money's been paid doesn't mean that there would automatically be a criminal conviction. But it does mean that there would automatically be a thorough investigation, because if we're paying out £13,500, it's clear that on the balance of probability, this girl was abused, what she's saying is true, and there should be a thorough and full investigation by the police. And there's no evidence that that's happened.
Well, that's certainly the case with Holly Greig, but of course it's also the case with this terrible abuse of the Hampstead children. Now, we showed this yesterday, but I'm going to bring it up again because it's very significant. The London Evening Standard ran a story, woman suspected of trafficking 40 children into Heathrow as ringleader of child sex smuggling gang arrested in Nigeria. The two 8 and 9-year-old, the two Hampstead children, told of children being brought into UK from Africa. But this judge Mrs. Pawley, in a secret court, said the children's video testimony was a myth, and then blamed the mother for torturing them to create the story. It's remarkable, isn't it, that that Miss Pawley just happens to be a judge who has been involved with the Holly Greig case as well. But here we've got former detective sergeant, 20 years experience, prepared to go live on camera to say that when he interviewed the mother, he absolutely believed her story, and indeed that of the children, of course. And then he says on camera, there has been no proper investigation into this case by the Metropolitan Police. It's in your face, isn't it?
It is very much so. Justice Palfrey and her decision, I mentioned before how this throws up so many parallels to the Holly Greig case, and it really does. One of the things which won't go away from the Hampstead case is the interviews with the children are in the public domain now. They're online. It's impossible to watch that and not believe the children. It's because they're children. They're very, despite what they've been through, innocent in the way they explain things is very matter of fact. And knowing children, you couldn't coach that. You couldn't even get remotely close to coaching that. It's nonsense. And it's long interviews often with the police. And the children are extremely persuasive. The parallels with the Holly Greig case go further than simply the nature of the story that's been told to cover it up, the nature of the excuses that have been given by the state. The Holly Greig case was also related to Satanist ritual abuse, as the Hampstead case is alleged to have been. And although this is an aspect of the Holly Greig case that's not been publicised greatly, I think essentially because back in 2009, Robert, when he was trying to get some attention for the case, just thought it wouldn't be believed. It would seem too fantastic. I've gone to other people who have interviewed Holly and got a report from them, so that this is not coming in any way through Robert Green. Robert's not involved with this, and Robert's not telling me anything or speaking about this indirectly. So he's not in any way breaking any injunction or gagging order. This comes from an entirely different source, but a source who has also interviewed Holly. And Holly, I'll just read a few extracts here from this report. It says here, Holly described events that were completely consistent with being at a Satanist ritual, including testimony that the people present were dressed in robes. Holly said she saw her abusers wearing robes. They wore robes with no clothes underneath. He goes on to mention that there was an altar, and that two of the individuals who I won't name both led the service from the altar most of the time. He then goes on to say Holly was forced. This is difficult for a lunchtime programme, but anyway, Holly was forced to have sex with a dog. The dog was then sacrificed, and she had to drink its blood. She also said that she witnessed the human sacrifice of a brown-skinned adult man and was then forced to eat some of the flesh of the sacrificed person. The drinking of the dog's blood and eating of the flesh of the sacrificed man was also done by others who were present, according to Hawley. Hawley also said she saw other children at the rituals where she was abused and gave names of 7 other alleged victims. This report comments, amongst the twisted goals of Satanist seduce SRA is the corruption of the child to make the child want to do things which are perverse and evil and to consider them as normal and good. Hence the forced incest and bestiality. Now that's difficult enough to read. It's also an exact parallel of the Hampstead case, and what we're seeing there is events which seem incredible, but they are being reported multiple times all across the country. Hawley reported it, Hampstead have reported it. There's a charity in Dundee called Izzy's Promise, who is set up solely originally to look after and help victims of Satanist ritual abuse. And they have many, many reports of this sort of behaviour and crimes. So this does not seem to be simply a one-off, and it does not simply seem to be some sort of satanic panic or attempt at getting back at an ex-husband or any of the other excuses that have been trotted out.
Right, David, thank you for taking us through that. It is a horrible subject. It's one that UK Column has been aware of for some time, and we have also known for many years that there was a lot more to the Holly Gregg story than came into the public domain previously, and as you've quite rightly said, that was the case because we know from police officers themselves who've been involved with dealing with satanic ritual abuse cases that they know that there's a danger the public can't even cope with the abuse, let alone that it was carried out in a ritualistic form. I'm going to say how interesting that sources close to the police are telling us that inside London's police, it is known that there are connections between the Hampstead abuse case and Dolphin Square. So we'll wait to see how that unfolds. I'm going to mention Robert Green in just a moment, but before we go there, we'll just bring this up on screen from Chad. There's been a protest in Kirkby after there was a plan to put a children's care home into a largely residential area. Now, we could discuss NIMBYism, but that's not the point of the case. The real point of the case is this, that the children's home was one of an increasing number being run by the security company G4S. So have we really got to the stage now where we are so lax about the safety of our children or children within public protection that we're now going to hand those children over to what are largely totally unaccountable corporate organisations who are clearly using children for profit?
Yes.
Well, sorry, David, my mistake. I will come back to you. We just wanted to say here that the UK Column has recently run an interview with Robert Green, and of course, Robert is totally gagged by the state. If you haven't seen this interview, you may be very interested to see it and reflect on the fact that this is the state of a man in Britain in 2015, that he is not allowed to speak about cases of abuse north of the border. He's not allowed to speak out if he's contacted about cases of abuse north of the border. And that gagging order is for life, and it exists wherever he may be in the world. So encourage you to see this extraordinary video, and it reflects life in Britain under David Cameron's government as was. We're not talking about a communist state or indeed communist China. So that video will be shown after the show, and we'll also remind you that we've got 24-hour live streaming. If you like what we do, perhaps you consider taking out an individual or a joint membership. with a discount on the joint memberships. Well, there we are. Over to you, David. I'm sorry I cut you off slightly. We've got this headline as well, so I don't know whether you just wanted to comment on Robert before you move on to this one. We've got the clock's moving quite fast as well, so we need to do these quite quickly.
Okay. I think I butted in rather than you interrupted me, so apologies about that. A couple of quick points. One of the most remarkable things about Robert's gagging order is that he is prohibited. He's been told in court that if anybody contacts him regarding fresh allegations of child sexual abuse in Scotland, he can't be involved, do anything, say anything, report it, tell it to the police, nothing. He's prohibited from doing that, which is, I mean, clearly utterly unlawful. You're talking about a man who's got a very, very firm sense of what justice is and would want to be stepping up to do the right thing and protect people, but he's prohibited from doing that. A couple of other very quick things about profit-making prisons. The free market system is very wonderful. It produces a lot of goods. A free market system in goods is very, very good. A free market system in bads is very, very bad. We don't want people competing to have the worst conditions, the cheapest jails, the most draconian conditions. What stops the free market doing that is competition, right? Choice. The people who go into children's homes and prisons have no choice in the matter, so there is no free market. It's not private enterprise. It's corporate involvement with the state, which is something else entirely. If we can move on quickly to the police in Scotland. I said around a month ago that Sir Stephen House had been backed by Nicola Sturgeon and given a vote of confidence by Nicola Sturgeon, and therefore might not last a month. Well, I might not have the timeline quite right, but it's looking very, very bad for Police Scotland. We have a problem with stopping and searching children. This has gone down badly. It's played badly in the public, and the Police Scotland response has been to lie, to massage the figures. And now the Scottish Daily Mail has managed to find an email from a senior police officer discussing and instructing people that when they stop children for consensual searches, stop and search on children, that the thing to do is just not to write it down anymore. Don't record it as a stop and search. Just make a note in your notebook, but don't put it into the figures so it's not available for freedom of information requests. So what the Police Scotland are doing is simply hiding the truth. That has not played particularly well. And we've had actually politicians speaking out a little bit about the abuse that's coming from Police Scotland and the direction given to Police Scotland by Sir Stephen House, the Chief Constable. Now, the politicians are speaking out in different ways. We have quite a brave and direct statement from the Liberal Democrats, and something much less strong from the Labour Party. But even Nicola Sturgeon is weighing in. She's saying she supports the Chief Constable, but he must not be allowed to be a law unto himself, and that she has urged him to reflect on his performance. So that sounds like what happens just before you're sacked. So I think Sir Stephen House remains under pressure, and that the ongoing system of lying to the Scottish people is not actually playing very well.
Okay, we'll just look at that headline again, because I did have both pages here. People can find it themselves. From Scottish Daily Mail, humiliation of a police chief. And there was more inside. This is the bit you've referred to. No chief constable can be a law unto himself. Seems to me that just noting it in your notebook and hiding it from public scrutiny under proper police statistics is actually lying to the public. I think you were a bit kind to them there. Right, well, I'm just going to move on with this, because yesterday we put out a very strong warning that we have been told from several sources there is an intention by, I'm going to call them agents of the government, to help work to stir up violence on the streets, and paedophilia is going to be used as the excuse. We were alerted to this, Oxford Mail saying that this coming Saturday there's going to be a big EDL demonstration in Oxford. Now, if you visit EDL's Twitter page, it's got information there. Sorry, that might have been Facebook. Apologies for that. Now, they are saying no racism will be tolerated. They're saying it's effectively a peaceful demonstration, and I'm repeating that, peacefully protesting against militant Islam. But here is the EDL going into Oxford. And of course, this follows on against a massive exposure of Asian paedophiles under Operation Bullfinch. Of course, the other side comes in, Unite Against Fascism, and they are calling for people to go there. Here it is. Because of EDL's attempt to hijack the suffering of Oxfordshire victims of child sexual exploitation. But I can say that, of course, Unite Against Fascism did nothing to help the abuse of the children, the white youngsters at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. Now, we also had a report that Tommy Robinson had been seen in Oxford this morning. We don't know whether that's correct, but we are going to remind people of this extraordinary man. And some months ago, there was a furore around an event at the London School of Economics with Majid Nawaz, chair of Quilliam and Global Islamist Party, and an ex-LSE student. But of course, Tommy Robinson was also connected in with the BBC and was connected through to Aqil Ahmed, BBC head of religion and ethics, and a very strange company called Colas, working at the heart of UK, that when we started to ask questions as to who they were, they didn't want to speak to us. And when we followed it through, this man, here he is, Mr. Ahmed himself, he didn't want to disclose the relationship between the BBC and fraudster Tommy Robinson. That was to do with a mortgage fraud. So what is going on? Well, where can we go from there? I'm going to say we've got a plan to destroy human rights in this country, and this was been picked up here by RINF, Alternative News. Defence Secretary Fallon is using the safety of British troops to say we've got to scrap the European Convention on Human Rights and replace it with a British Bill of Human Rights. Who's followed on that? Well, Russia Today. And here's the statement: offering enemy combatants the right to sue the British government and expecting soldiers on the battlefield to operate with the same level of caution as police patrolling London streets will render future foreign combat operations unworkable. But the report and that statement was said by the Policy Exchange. Well, we thought we'd do a little bit of research. Here they are. Have a look yourself, because they boast about how they have been able to influence all sorts of policy. And if we take one timeline, they're boasting that back in I think that must be 2002, they started pushing for police and crime commissioners, and surprise, surprise, that is exactly what the public has received. So this is an independent, non-partisan educational charity. That's what it says. Let's have a look at the people involved. Well, here are the trustees: David Frum, Richard Bryants, etc. We didn't have time to go through them all. Let's have a look at a few. We'll start with Mr. Frum, chairman of the board, neo-conservative Canadian American political commentator and speechwriter for George Bush. We've got Richard Bryants. He works with Edmund de Rothschild, so he's a big securities banking and merchant banking man. We've got Simon Brocklebank Fowler, former diplomat, investment banker, now head of Cubic Consultancy for global corporations, and they've donated a shed load of money to the Conservatives. And we'll leave you with Richard Earman, journalist, think tanker and businessman. He's previously been a government advisor on employment and Northern Ireland and writes for the Telegraph. But don't worry, they're all independent. And we'll leave you with this man, David Cameron, in case you can't recognise him, where it's been revealed that 1 in 5 of businessmen who signed pro-Tory letter were given honours by David Cameron, and a third are Tory donors. So here we are. The Prime Minister doled out 18 MBEs, OBEs, CBEs and knighthoods to signatories of the letter over the last Parliament. And we just say this is corruption, insider dealing, and indeed misconduct in public office. But of course, these people are above the law. And final comment from you, David, on the law or the weather.
Well, let's just finish with Police Scotland. A couple of extra little snippets of information on how things are going for Sir Stephen House. We've got the head of the Liberal Democrat Party in Scotland, a chap called Willie Rennie, who's quite good on knowing what liberty is. He's actually, unlike most of them, able to define it. He has said that the Sir Stephen House should change his ways or go. So that's the level of political support that Sir Stephen is getting. But more worrying for him than that, when Nippy Sweetie, we mentioned earlier on, we were talking about Scottish nicknames for corrupt politicians. Nippy Sweetie is the nickname for Nicola Sturgeon and defines her somewhat acerbic manner of communication. Nippy Sweetie was talking to a room full of policemen, and when she was going on about how the chief constable should not be a law unto himself and needs to reflect on things, she got a standing ovation. There was rapturous applause from the constables, sergeants and inspectors who were in the room. So it sounds like Chief Constable Sir Stephen House is rapidly losing the support and confidence of the rank and file of Police Scotland. So more I think, to see on that shortly. I would be surprised if he lasts long now.
Well, David, thank you very much for telling us that. It does bring a bit of warmth to our hearts. I believe exactly the same thing is going on inside the Metropolitan Police. Good policemen and women have simply had enough of working for senior officers who are either involved in paedophilia themselves or are prepared to cover it up for other police officers, politicians or members of the establishment. On that happy note, we'll finish. We will be back on Tuesday, so there will be no UK Column News on Monday. And if you reflect on the weekend, Easter weekend, for those of you who are spiritual in the proper sense of the word, because we've been revealing Satanism is at work, but for those people who are clearly working for the right type of spiritualism, it requires all of us to stand up and be counted. It's not enough to be there with your local church group, drinking tea and cuddling one another. Sorry to be a little bit hard, but we've much work to do. Thanks for joining us, David. We'll be back on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Thanks for joining UK Column News. Bye-bye.